We are back. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowsky, and as always, talking about hockey celebrations, the yang to my yin. Susan Hobson's here. Susan, how are you?
People can't see me if it's a podcast. No, wait, they can see me if it's YouTube. We're doing a little... And in podcast land, it's Monday, but today we are shooting on a Friday, I have to admit. So I had to warm us up with a little celebration dance. I had to get this party started. Let's see yours, buddy. What would you do in water polo when you scored?
There's just a fist pump. There's no like dance or anything.
I don't know. We're going to have to squeeze this out by the end of this podcast, I think.
What is it? You do the like synchro where you lie on your back and point your toes?
I go usually with the Egyptian, it's kind of my, maybe, I don't know. Who knows? But,
I actually like that. That's dope.
Yeah, I think I go with the flow, whatever inspires me right in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And as always, we have to start off with a quote here.
Oh, yeah, we got to get serious now.
So we have one here from Rick Warren, and he says, "Great leaders genuinely care for and love the people they lead more than they love leading itself."
Oh, I love this.
Wow, look at that.
Tell us why you chose this one, sir.
Well, it actually is a shout out to our guest who's here today. Our special guest, Alexi Drouin, is here with us. He's the vice president of Quantum University in the beautiful Hawaii. And if you head on over to his LinkedIn page, he says his purpose in life is to raise awareness through love, art, experience, and education.
Woo!
So I wanted to start with a little bit of love. And also, as our friend Wes Eugene talks about, we need more love in business. Now, Alexi, what do you think of the quote?
I zeroed in kind of the word love there. I think that sometimes that you lose track of that as a leader. You don't always think of it that way. So when you're focusing on that as your true north or whatever that may be, I think that's a guiding principle that, especially as far as leading a team and even, where it goes as far as making this a better company, always starting with love is always a good thing.
We happen to concur, don't we, Rob? This is totally our Leadership 2.0 mission here at the Leadership Launchpad Project. I was fortunate enough to first cross paths with my friend Alexi when we were actually classmates down at Harvard. We went back to get further education to really work on our leadership games. But I feel like I'm privy to the backstory here, and our audience is not on you and the mission that you're on in this world and how you came to be on that mission. So will you help our audience plug into some of that, Alexi?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Rob, as well for having me. And Susan and I met at Harvard on our quest to become better leaders and better coaches as well. And so I guess we've continued to connect over the years beyond that. And I'm looking forward to seeing in this conversation how we can kind of, because I think we're very much in alignment as far as our leadership coaching strategy. And I think my position, I've been able to implement it more from an entrepreneur and business side of it. And I mean, the short of it is I have 20 years of experience now in what I call like alternative higher education. So not your kind of classic academia. And effectively, I bootstrapped Quantum University from nothing to now we have over 10,000 students in 80 countries. And we have a staff of about 30 employees, and that are, all online. So mostly I see myself as the technical co-founder. So I've done the infrastructure, the technical infrastructure engineering. The reality of what that means is I've done just about everything in the company, because we did not start at 30 employee with 10,000 students. We started with 12 students in my father's living room somewhere, and so from going from that to that means I've done everything. I've done marketing, admission, production, everything, the entire life cycle, obviously of the university, but also the students. And, I never did at the time. I think now it's become, I think the language and the terminology are there. And I never kind of saw it in the moment, but like, it was like a startup story in a sense, because, it's not like I was in a garage or something, but it's like I was in my father's apartment, and I didn't even have a desk. I think at the beginning, I was on my laptop working, on my lap in bed. And then my father walked in and was like, maybe you need a desk. Like maybe maybe that's let's go to IKEA and solve this problem right now. But and I think it was kind of this naive stumble through it, which kind of makes it, look, kind of ridiculous now. Like you stumble right into creating a university sounds ridiculous, but neither myself or my father had any really formal training or education as far as doing a business. Dr. Paul's a medical doctor, obviously, so his background was more in medicine. Mine was in film production. And so there's a lot of stuff I learned kind of, I wouldn't say the hard way, but I had to live through it to make the mistakes. So hopefully, somebody else can learn from that. But at the end of the day, it's to me, I wouldn't change a bit, because it's, in addition to kind of a startup story, it's kind of an American dream story, really. I went from I love, by the way, that Rob, you said my last name correctly, which I've long now forgotten about the proper French pronunciation. But yeah, I went from being born in a little town in Canada that was 300, 400 people, to now I live in Hawaii, in Honolulu, and I have a dog. I'm a recent father, as Susan said. So for me to go from that to living my dream in Hawaii, I don't know, I've got to be able to inspire somebody, because if I could do it, somebody else can.
I love it. And
So good.
one thing you mentioned is you didn't start out to create a university. What was the purpose and mission that you were on?
It's gonna sound real bad. We were just trying to pay the rent, I think, is what it was. If I recall at the moment.
Yeah.
I think I was way too young, and I was like 17, 18, 19. Like I wasn't thinking mission. Now I am, and hopefully that's something we could talk about. Like I wholeheartedly believe that's the way to drive an organization forward. But honestly, because I was at that time an immigrant, so we had just moved to San Diego at the time. Now we're in Hawaii, but at the time we we're in California. I just didn't want to go back. I love my life. I was like, I'm in California. This is great. I'm loving it. We just got to keep paying the rent. And I think it was stumbling into, what problem do we need to solve for somebody? And again, wouldn't even put it that way at the time. And also I think at the time, I was younger. I was really trying to just facilitate what my father was doing, and the best way I could. I was always good. And I think that was probably one of the best investments. I got a computer as a kid, which, now, and we're all probably in this age bracket, but because nowadays, every kid's got an iPad pretty much out of the womb. But it was not like that for me. And so for me to have a computer very early on and changed my trajectory, because now I'm very good with computers, right? And so being able to provide the way I've explained it for years is, my father is the content and I'm the form. So, he has the medical background, the education, the information. I come in and I could put that on a website, make a video about it, and get it out into the world. And so that's where I focused my what I could best do to push us to the next stage. So yeah, and then I think at some point we're like, oh, this is working. It's a good way for us to pay our rent. And then things picked up to the point where, all of a sudden now it's different, right? And so it's about making it better. And then you put words into it. I think we figured out our mission, our true official mission statement was figured out years later, when we were actually building a team and really working on building the company. And so I think I'm getting probably rambling on here, but I think at the beginning you kind of work on building a product, right? And you're not, and you're just focusing on that. And I think that's what we did in the first few years. And then at some point that translates to how do you build a company to sell that product? And that's when I think we crafted our vision statement, our mission statement officially.
What did those early years, Alexi, teach you about leadership? Because I think one of the things that we really examine on this show is just the gap in leadership development and training. You know, we're usually on the job 10 years until we actually start to develop ourselves as leaders.
Yeah, correct.
But oftentimes for entrepreneurs, and I can speak to this as an entrepreneur for more than 15 years running my own business, but it really is trial by fire, right? Like you get a lot of that experientially the first 5 to 10 years on the job, and most of it through the error and the learning from the error, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, think about it. Like we met in 2019 or something.
Yeah,
that's really when I started to like take leadership training and whatever, learning about coaching.
Officially.
Officially. Yeah. And of course nowadays it's so much easier to get that kind of content. You know, I don't think that level of content was not accessible 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I think from a work perspective, it's a hustle. I think the first few years, in a way, it all feels like a blur, maybe because it's 20 years ago. I think the early stage, from a leadership standpoint, is that at first you do everything, right? Like, so it was just, my father at the beginning, myself, and then, we brought in somebody to help with, accounting, that kind of level, and then technical support. And that was the core team for 4 people for the longest time. There's a point where it started to break, I think. I know, because what happens, so my father effectively did the selling, the enrollment, and somebody did the finances, but I did everything else, right? I did the production, I did the course building, I did the website, I was doing the marketing, I was sending the emails, I was doing the social media. And, it's like my head's about to explode, right? And I remember it was funny, I had a desk at the time, thank God I used to pride myself on this thing, but I had a U-shaped desk that had like several computers, and it was like I could turn from one job and do another job.
God.
And I know. And it was because we would do these live broadcasts, and while I'm doing the live broadcast, I'm entering technical support and so here's I think probably the mistake that I did at the time, and I think it's a lesson of like letting go, right? And just at the beginning, it's such your baby, and somehow you think, which is such a fallacy, like you think you're the only one that can do this. You don't, like somebody else does it, it's just not as good as you. And so what I did is I brought in an assistant, which was a huge jump at the point for us, and instead of being like, hey, you're going to do this or that, it was like, oh, here's this part of the job I don't want to do, or this section of it, do this. And I remember spending months, training him, to do these things. And then surprise, surprise, after a few months, he left. He had like some, whatever. He's a young kid. He moved to another city. And, I was so frustrated and disappointed at the time because I had spent all this time training. And really, I didn't invest in, I think, at the right time. So the lesson that I made at that time was I was so frustrated because it was such a blowback for me, because now all these little things I didn't like doing that I had delegated to him, I now had to start doing all over again. And then I went to Dr. Paul, and I was like, hey, let's hire somebody that just does production. And let's hire somebody that just does the website. And let's hire just somebody that does the office management kind of stuff. And that ended up probably being one of the best decisions. And it, again, wasn't done consciously of how good it would be for us. It was just done out of desperation and frustration, which is, again, why you don't have to make the same mistakes that I had. And also, you can't do this if you're not ready for it. Like, we were breaking at the seam at that point. I think a lot of people, they want to start hiring because they don't want to do the shit job. You've got to do the shit job. So I don't know if I could
you can say
kind of
that,
language.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got to kind of do the hustle until you can't do it anymore. And I think that's a lot of, now you see like the glory stories of, these entrepreneurs, and they're walking on, $1 billion and so on. There's a part of it that you kind of have to do yourself at the beginning. But when you're ready for that, you can't just do this part. They've got to take the whole job at once, and you've got to delegate the whole thing. And also, you need to hire up in a sense, like that person that comes in, that's going to be your video producer, needs to know more than you do, like in the interview, right? Because sure, you'll train them certain things of, that are specific to your company, but they need to elevate the story forward as well. You need to grow the entire intelligence of the company by bringing in somebody that's smarter than you in that area. So you can't just compare yourself somehow. And at first it's going to be buggy. Like it's not, you're going to be like, oh my God, this is not what I want. But over time it gets better with patience. But by us doing that, I feel like if I look back on the years, those were the beginning of the years where like, it's like the hockey stick years, right? Where everything grew off. Because all of a sudden I could then refocus on becoming vice president, right? Or the chief technical stuff. So my time got better allocated for bigger problems. And I think was this like an article? I think it was an article in our coaching class, but it's the monkey, the HBR article. I'm going to butcher the title here, but effectively it's like all of those little responsibilities somebody could take on wholly. And I'm, I'd be lying to say that was a smooth process for me. I think letting go and delegating is a hard one, I think, for a lot of people. But the sooner you get over it, the better. I could tell you that from experience. You want to be on the other side of that wall. There's no real benefit to holding on to these things. And in fact, the real long game, like if you really want to be like honest with yourself, like because some people, that's not, the case for me necessarily, but a lot of people, their big goal is I want to sell my company, or whatever it is, or in that case, you need to literally let go of everything, everything that you're holding on, because otherwise you can't sell that thing.
Literally.
So it has no value if you can't, let go of the control at that point. So, so that's maybe a lesson I learned, I think, in the early days, that led to some growth for sure in the company.
And then how about these days? How do you think about leadership today, Alexi? Because I know this is also something we kind of riffed on in our course. What does it mean to you now that you've had 20 years at the helm of your business? It's got to look a little different than it did back in the early days where you were just trying to delegate,
I think yes. Short answer is it's true. I mean, at first you grow with experience, right? Like you all of a sudden become, wiser. You've seen a few things. You're more, road tested. The little bumps along the roads aren't so much. You're kind of used to seeing those. Yeah. I think, I'm, and this is maybe what I'm thinking about now and something that I'm trying to bring in, currently into the business. And I'm not saying anything bad about the other stuff, to be sure. Like it's complementary to most thinking. I think people think about being a mission-driven, whatever company or vision-driven. Those are great. Like you need to have a vision. Ideally, the sooner you have one, the better it is, because at the beginning, you almost say yes to everything because you're in survival mode. Like I said, you're just trying to pay the rent. But there's a point where you start to need to say no. And the way that you say no to things is by having a mission where you go, actually, my mission is to do this. And although this opportunity here is very interesting to me, I'm going to need to say no because it doesn't work with my mission, right? Or the vision that I'm trying to build. But I think recently what I've been really fascinated with is trying to build like what I guess would refer to as a value-driven organization. And I'm also not talking, and those are good as well. I'm not talking about like values in the like values, and you put these big words on your wall and you're like excellence and accountability. And those are great. Don't get me wrong. Like, and it's like, and it's like, it becomes like a PR exercise, and it's like, we're diversity, right? It's like, what does that mean? Like, what do you like? Nobody on their daily log into their, their profile accounts and they think about like, oh, what does, so I'm not, and those are good to have, don't get me wrong. Like, I think it's important to say those and it be part of the things you need to communicate as a leader. But I'm thinking about value in the sense of what does somebody get, right? And it's not necessarily a financial thing. Sometimes people think value, and, because it can be like, what's the value of something? So it's not the price of what something costs, it's really the value that people get out of it. And because at the end of the day, you're a company, right? So if you can't provide value for what you're doing, you're not in business. Nobody's going to pay you for what you're doing, and therefore it's not a good business model, whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And my thinking on the matter is more value you provide at every stage is going to trickle throughout the company in a positive way. And the basic example of doing this is regardless of the financial incentive, you should make, like what you guys are doing now, like the best kind of content out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is freely available to anybody that just works with your mission, what you're doing, right? Or help people without necessarily needing to be like compensated for whatever it is, just in alignment with this is the value that I provide to anybody. And because I believe that kind of action will get you more people interested in what you're doing, right? More effectively leads into what you're doing, and providing more value to that group of people will in turn create more client, and providing more value to those clients. Well, in my sense, as a university, those will create graduates. And then more graduates I have that have gotten so much value from what I'm doing, they'll turn around and they'll say to, 3 other people, you should really come to Quantum University because they're so great, because here's everything that I got from them. Like, think of like the product that you don't even need. Like when I got when I started using OpenAI, like ChatGPT, I was like, this is so cool. It's free. And you can type this thing in and it spits out. Like I was out there like talking to people in the street that I didn't know. I was like, did you hear about this thing? Like they didn't pay me to do any of this. And I'm out there going like, because I got so much value out of it. I'm like, you need to try this.
It's a great example.
And then guess what happens when all of a sudden that one person brings in 3 other people? You need to hire more people, right? You can't just be, so also now that providing value trickled all the way to bringing more people, and that same kind of equation works for your staff. You need to provide as much value to your staff, not just compensation. Talk about like culture and, what do they want? What kind of training, what kind of growth that I can bring them? Because, because I don't know, again, because that will all trickle into being a better organization. Because I just can't think of a way where providing too much value is a bad thing. Like nobody's ever walked into a luxury car and go like, wow, all these options. Like, I don't want them. Mm-hmm. This, what's wrong with this is that there's too much good things.
Yeah.
Like this is, and so, but on the other hand, the reverse is 100% true. So if you don't provide enough value for what you're doing, you'll get negative feedback, you'll get bad reviews, you'll have a bad reputation. And all of these things will lead to less sales, which is not good for your growth. So to me, it's like how, and so that's the today, if you're, kind of want to ask as a leader, like that's what I'm trying to focus in on. What's the most amount of value that we could provide to our clients, our students in my case, and then our staff, really the people that work for us, because I just know that doing that without thinking about the immediate return, the ROI in a sense, will over time, by being patient, will be a positive return on that for sure.
What would you say to the leaders out there? Like a lot of folks right now, they're looking at sort of the economic uncertainty in the market, and they're pulling back from offering that extra value to both their clients and their folks who work there. What would you say to those leaders?
I think it's hard. I think it's you've got to look at your, it's hard for me to, to necessarily comment about other industries. But you can't lead with fear. I think that's as much, like we said at the beginning, like you should lead with love, right? And not with fear. And I remember as an example, this is specific to my industry, so this does not always apply to everybody. But at the beginning of the pandemic, when like things were like closing down and like, whatever it was, like actually, and people were like, oh my God, I remember having to tell my staff like, hey, I know this is kind of like scary and there's uncertainty. Obviously, we don't know. We've never experienced this before. But coming from a place of experience, like from in the education industry, this is why it's specific for me, but it tends that during recession time, when times are harder, people tend to actually invest in their education to, whatever it is, to make a better career, to have a better job, and so this is why education in a sense is more recession proof than other industries, is that, so don't always just be caught in the fear cycle of whatever, like, oh my God, the inflation or whatever it is. Like, really look at it and be like, you know what, it turns out that, when with 2008, for example, wasn't like a good year for us necessarily, but we also didn't go out of business, right? Like we just because, guess what, those people that lost their thing turned around and said, oh, well, let me re-educate, let me reskill myself, let me find another career and reinvent myself. And of course, we couldn't have predicted at the time, but 2020 was for online universities, maybe not for all businesses, but what turned out to be a really good year, right? So even though at the beginning people could have made decisions based on fear, that did not actualize. And so, yeah, I think too, in that, just as a specific tool, you got to take a breather there, because if that level, as a leader anyway, if you somehow, if the rest of your team catches that you are uncertain or you're scared or that it will trickle down all the way down the line. And it is our job, this is what you call them, like fearless leader or something like that, to hold that position to a certain degree. There's an ethical standpoint here where if you are in trouble, you need to communicate that and be transparent with your team. But this is why, like, you need to take a moment and not make an emotional, I would call it, like, rash decision. And that way, so you don't, like, because there could be a real reason financially, logically, that, for whatever reason in the economy, you should be concerned and you should address that and find a creative solution for it. But if it's just an emotional thing, you might want to reconsider and before, saying something or doing something that could spread fear instead of the other way around, right?
I'm curious. I want to circle back to this. You just mentioned ChatGPT, and you're in the education space. So I'm like dying to know your perspective in terms of what you're predicting. In terms of AI and the impact that AI is going to have, not only on the education industry, right, but on business itself. What are your thoughts in terms of the future of work?
I'm extremely optimistic about it. And again, I don't know. I'm very much knowledgeable in the education space of it. So, like, don't ask me, will it take over the world, or whether it's the greatest threat to humanity or something. I'm sure there's a valid argument. Actually, this side note, not that, but I heard, like, Sam Altman, the founder of ChatGPT, like, walks around with this blue bag. And it's like the equivalent of what they call the football in, like, American, with the president. So there's this briefcase that the president carries around that has the nuclear code. So at any point, he's ready to somehow, like, hit that button, which is kind of scary. So, but for Sam Altman and ChatGPT or OpenAI, he has this bag that he walks around that if somehow ChatGPT becomes, like, sentient and is ready to take over the world, you can press this button and it kills
Really?
ChatGPT. Yeah, this is what I heard.
ChatGPT will kill him first.
Yeah, exactly. So he's ready. But anyway, that's not my area of expertise, nor can I speak too much to that. But from an education standpoint, I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Because at first, I think education's in this tricky spot, because especially if you fear, oh my God, technology is about to take my job, or, oh my God, these students can now write these papers, without having to write papers, or they can cheat more. Like, these are all fear-based, analogy on it. Like, in other words, like, maybe, I don't know if that's the case, but when the calculator came around, maybe somebody was like, oh my God, these students won't have to add up these numbers on a piece of paper. How will they ever learn? Yeah, and instead of saying this calculators are actually going to help them, do harder and harder calculation, and, this kind of menial stuff that's more complicated, that's very time consuming, you won't have to do. So it's kind of seeing Open AI or ChatGPT as like the calculator for writing, right? And you'd be stupid to not train your students to use it, because when they'll get in the workforce, their employers are going to want them to use ChatGPT. And so, so I think there's a reverse of this, which is you'd be better off kind of, embracing it in a sense and figuring different ways for them to prove their competencies in certain areas than whether, they could do one thing or another. And and even so from an education, so just like recently, for example, like I do obviously a lot of development. A big part of my job is, coding and all that stuff. And one of them is like regex or something super complicated. Well, it's pretty complicated way of doing link building and all that stuff. OpenAI could do this, like something that would take me maybe 2 hours to kind of figure out. You just type in and then, in not even 30 seconds, you get the answer to it. Like, how is that not a good thing for development, for business building? And it's, again, not just for writing. This now can apply to coding as well. And it can take somebody that's a medium coder or a basic coder and, bring them up a level just by having access to this calculator. So to go back to the education end, I think it has application all across the board, because there's my specific opinion on technology and education is that sometimes for education's purpose specifically, sometimes like technology could be, like, in other words, like you could argue that one-on-one teaching with somebody, like in person, face to face, is the best kind of education there is. And I think I'd be like, I'd be hypocritical as a and I run an online university, so it's not to my benefit to say that. But guess what? That's probably true, right? So maybe that's not the place where we should apply technology for. Guess where we could apply technology? It's administration, right? Enrollment of students. So that entire process, this is what, I've done over the years now at Quantum University, and why we're so efficient at doing certain things is that, from lead to enrollment, a lot of it, I would say maybe 80 to 90% of it is automated. And so is, the other end of the life cycle with the student. It's something like we do over 100,000 actions a month that are automated. And so that neither our staff is really aware of, or at least they're not, if they'd have to do those 100,000 actions, like they would, probably. And then again, these are repeatable, automatable, like very mind-numbing stuff that is done all behind the scene that our students don't know. And there is probably the opportunity to, where there's automation, there's also opportunity for AI to come in. So at first, probably assessment of student data. So when you're assessing a student to come into the program, as well as the assessment towards competency, I think is another area that is I find very interesting as well, because you want to be, I think there's got to be a change or in the industry as a whole. You think about like credit hours, that kind of stuff. It's based on the Carnegie unit, which just by the word Carnegie, you should be like, that sounds outdated.
Old.
It's old. It's really based on how much seat time, how much your ass is sitting on a seat inside of a classroom. And guess what? That metric really doesn't apply, no more, because, it's online, and you could argue that, it's much better to have a video you can watch over and over again at whatever speed you want than sitting and listening to a lecture. And so there's been a conversion towards competency-based education, and, making it more skill-based as well. And that competency-based education, then the question is, how do you really measure whether somebody has reached, competency or mastery in something? And I think that ChatGPT can be, or open it, or, a GPT model, a large language model can help towards that as well. And just writing in general, like writing and grading. You could have the AI analyze a piece of text, give out a grade based on a metric that you predefine.
Wow.
And it goes to the same argument that they've talked about for years. Like, it's not that AI will replace the doctor, is that the doctor will start using an AI tool that will allow the doctor to do a better job and be more efficient, and like an augmented doctor, right? And so it's the same thing for us. It's like an augmented university where our graders can use an AI model to analyze the text in order to make grading quicker, more efficient, and so that's where, I mean, I see it across the board. You could apply AI in 20 different ways in higher education, and I see most of it as being positive. And we should probably, whatever, like, sure, you could be afraid that students are going to write papers on their own, but so what? I write emails with ChatGPT all the time now, and I'm better for it. So, and they will once they're in the workforce. So anyway, I'll step off my soapbox here. As you can see here,
I'm glad we asked. You definitely
hit a button.
I did. I could tell.
Alexi, we got to ask you the big question here.
Of course.
Is what do you want your legacy to be?
It's weird. I saw that you pinpointed that in the question, and it's weird. I had never really thought about it that way, and I think for the longest time, and maybe because I started this university with my father, that I've been focused on his legacy for a long time, and I think it was also the first time somebody asked me that question. Well, maybe period, but also since I've been a father, and that. Changes, I think, because you're, when you become a father, then you're starting to think about these things. And I guess, I don't know. I think I've kind of struggled mentally to see. I think the best way, I'm gonna get kind of Joe Dispenza on this, but it's like, I'm not sure what my legacy is. I think I'm picturing, like, it's more like a feeling of what I want to, which is like, I'm picturing myself like in a room of a large graduating class, and I'm presiding over that as they're graduating to their next level in their life. And maybe I should roll back a little bit. So I had this really meaningful insight several years back when we started to do graduation. So we had maybe not the first graduation, but either the second or the third, where we started to actually have quite a bit of graduates. And we started to do this graduation ceremony as part of our events. And part of the ceremony was we'd call the graduates on stage. And because, we're a small private university, so it's not like these huge colleges where you have to graduate, thousands of people. We gave them the time to come on stage and talk for 2 minutes, say who they are, their story, what they want to do, with their degree or what they're doing or going to do. And, I think before that moment, when you're in my position, I was like, oh, I build universities. That's what I do. Right. And so as my company is an education provider, my product is I sell courses, I sell degree programs. That's, the thing I'm actually selling. When really I had it wrong. My product is not courses or programs or degrees. My product are these students that are now going out into the world and doing all of these things. Oh, wow. And it shifted my perspective to, now we really need to, cater whatever the program is to making not just the best program, those things equate to each other, but making the best program for making the best students or best graduates to come out of our program. So, if you ask me my legacy, it's kind of vague in a sense, because it's like, I want to make higher education better, which is pretty vague, but it's like, it really means like helping people be better, helping lead themselves to a more meaningful life or meaningful career, however that may be. And that kind of goes back to my, what you read in my bio, like that's, me finding out what my purpose in life was, is kind of what I want to help other people do, whatever that, and that could take all sorts of different forms. So I'm not attached to that, but, I'm very much wanting to be like, hey, your purpose in life, for me, it's like having people have this kind of, the same way I just had an epiphany over like, my product's not my courses, my product are my students. That kind of aha moment for me is what I want other people to have. And so I don't know that works as far as a legacy, because I think, over that, over 100 years, that will fizzle in time. But if I can help a few people have a more meaningful life, more meaningful career, I'll be very happy. Because at the end of the day, that fits right into my own purpose, and what I want to do, and how that brings me meaning in my life.
Love it.
Amazing.
Love.
For folks out there, if you want to connect with Alexi, we've dropped his LinkedIn in the podcast notes. Also, you can check out quantumuniversity.com. Is there anywhere else you want folks to find you?
No, that's it. Yeah. Connect on LinkedIn, quantumuniversity.com. Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Perfect. And then obviously for us, if you want any leadership development, one-on-one executive mindset coaching, speaking, and more, head on over to elitehighperformance.com. Susan, is there anything you want to leave folks with today?
I just love this way of thinking about leadership as adding value and just making it that simple, right? It really helps our audience to just boil it down to what I feel like leadership really at the end of the day is all about, is just showing up and playing your biggest impact game, which to me means contributing the value that is you to the best and highest degree, right? So there's so much value in this interview. I know our audience is just going to love it. Thank you, Alexi, for coming in and sharing your sage wisdom with everybody.
Well, thanks. And here's my success dance. There we go. There we go. All right.
We got to end where we started, right?
Come on, Rob, you want to. Yeah.
I'm not, that's one thing that's far on my vulnerability scale.
Oh, no. Now we got to get him dancing, Alexi. We got to have you back on.
We I have a new mission in life.
I love it. Love the laughter, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Alexi. And for me, the place I want folks to land is leading from self. And this is where you allow fear to dissipate. And when we talked about ChatGPT in education, it's a, pun intended, quantum shift. And where you saw Alexi was not, oh, we have to keep the way we've always done it, ban it, get rid of, use AI to predict whether it was written by an AI, which some colleges are doing. It was, this is the future. How do we use it to make our folks better? And this can happen in any industry, with any technology, with any new way of thinking. And that's where we need to go in business, is lead from self, let go of fear, and grow. Alexi, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.